It's time again for the Insiders with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin Counties Association and the Tommy G. Thompson Center on Public Leadership.
Hi, I'm Scott Jensen, former Assembly Speaker.
And I'm Chuck Chvala, former Senate Majority Leader.
And we're the Insiders. Well, it was a big night for Democrats on Tuesday all across the country where they performed very well. Does that have any impact on what the races will look like for in Wisconsin, particularly the governor's race here?
Yeah, good question, Scott. I think it is kind of an all-determining thing. In fact, basically on Tuesday, the House of Cards collapsed. I mean, we've all looked at this. And by the way, I talked to Republicans privately, and they say, yeah, this Trump thing, I don't know what's going to happen and when's it going to. And you can tell they all want him off the stage so they can get back to normal. The problem is that exit, which we are now beginning, I believe, after Tuesday, is going to be an ugly one for the Republican Party. But what it does say for Wisconsin, and that's what we're about here, we're talking about Wisconsin. What it means is that we're going to have an amazing year next year for Democrats. Um, it wasn't just in the two governor's races where it was huge. And of course, we got a governor's race coming up here. It was Georgia utility commissioners. And of course, California went big. The three justices in Pennsylvania got their reelection thing. It was a slam dunk. So what does this tell you? I mean, the Republicans were hoping that they could get close in New Jersey, and that would send some good signals that maybe they're going to keep the Hispanics, and maybe there's a chance that they'll do better with African Americans, and that trend would continue. All of those things collapsed. The House of Cards has collapsed. What does that mean for Wisconsin? I think it means more rather than less people get into races. So, for example, we've got a pretty big field already in the governor's race, but there's a lot of talk about Mandela Barnes. Yeah, he'll probably get in, and we should talk about that in a minute. And there might be some other people out there. In fact, I've heard of another name that would be, a significant name that might get in. I would imagine Scott probably has some people on the Republican side. But the bad thing for the Republicans is that it just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter. I'm saying that for somebody in particular who I've said that phrase to in the past, and that person will watch this video. The reality is here that it's going to be a Democratic governor. It's going to be a Democratic sweep. Now, Mandela Barnes, that's a different case. There have already been some articles, New York Times articles, talking about how people maybe don't want Mandela Barnes in. In the election, he lost to Ron Johnson for the U.S. Senate, ran like 4 points behind Tony Evers. So there are people who are concerned about that and believe that part of the problem was some baggage that Mandela had. But Mandela's a charismatic guy, and he may be able to overcome that. But I do think that this is going to be a race where the Democratic primary, I think, will determine the governor of Wisconsin. Now, there are going to be other races that are going to be out there too, and a lot of other things. But I think the real big takeaway from Tuesday is that the House of Cards has finally collapsed. People knew it was going to at some point, or they thought it might, but this guy has lived for 10 years in this political space. Clearly, it's not working. And yes, Scott will say, and I agree, there's a lot of time before the election next year. But short of the usual authoritarian move of starting a war, I don't see anything that can save Republicans next year.
Well, I wasn't really surprised by the results on Tuesday. The big races, the marquee races, were in two blue states. Democrats are energized all across the country to find a way to stop Trump. And that's the easiest way for them to continue to get to win these sort of races where the Republicans are not as energized. Democrats are heavily energized. The voters are very polarized right now. So polarized, in fact, that a Democratic attorney general candidate in Virginia can say vile things about political violence, hoping to have his opponent or his legislative opponent, children die. I mean, this was just horrible stuff, but if it was followed by, but I'm going to fight to stop Trump, and it was all forgiven, like within a week. So I think the Democratic Party is locked in. They are energized. If you say you're against Trump, they are for you. Candidate equality may not matter as much because they feel this sort of wave coming. The top issue all across the country in those elections was affordability And I think that's the piece that will carry over here to Wisconsin. Wisconsin is not a blue state. Wisconsin is a 50-50 state. It's going to be close. All the polling that showed so far from Marquette and other places show that it's a wide open governor's race at this point. The top issues will be affordability. And I think that's what the debate will be in the race for governor on both sides of the aisle. I agree with you that because no Democrat in the Marquette poll is even above 8% of the electorate of voting for them, or Democratic primary voters, more people will look at that race and enter it. I think not only Mandela Barnes will get in, I'm hearing names of a business leader in Milwaukee on the Democratic side who may get in. On the Republican side, I don't think we're going to see more people get into the race. Tom Tiffany has a significant lead over Josh Shulman, but most Republican voters don't know either of the candidates. So while there may be an opportunity for someone to jump in, I think that's much less likely there. It's the Democratic side where the race, no one has any real traction at this point. The entrance of Mandela Barnes clearly would make him the front runner on the Democratic side. I also think that nudges the Democrats closer to the left in their answers on the affordability issue. It'll be pocketbook issues in 2026 that determine the election here in Wisconsin.
It's interesting. I do think there probably won't be any more Republicans because Republicans not going to win next year in Wisconsin. And by the way, if you're worried about swing state stuff, Georgia had 2 Democrats elected in the utility commissioner. What you see is that this is across the country. It was California, Pennsylvania, Georgia. Yes, it
Democrats
was,
are energized,
and
no doubt.
and in New Jersey. That was a state that they thought, hey, and they have won with Republican governors. I mean, Chris Christie, Todd Whitman. But let's go back to the Wisconsin Democratic side. I believe that the winner of the Wisconsin Democratic primary for governor is already out there running. And that includes Mandela Barnes. He's not going to win the Democratic nomination for governor. And I don't believe anyone else who enters the race after this will be, because the key people who may have had a shot at that have already pulled out, like Josh Chvala. Josh Chvala is running for re-election as Attorney General. I think that the existing group of people that you see in that race, there may be other entrants. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if there are 3 or 4 more entrants, partly because of what Scott said, because they see some points. But I think the ingredients are there for the people who are already running for governor, that those people from that group of people, the nominee for Democratic governor in Wisconsin will be there. But I think the idea that somehow this race is going to be competitive, and this isn't a blue state, we're a purple state. And Scott really kind of gave you the canary in the coal mine and the problem for Republicans, and that is this was the energized Democrats. It's one thing to see polling. Carlos Franklin's polling is always dead on. He's one of the top pollsters in the country. But the Marquette poll is always good. But it's very hard, and he would tell you this, I'm sure, as well. It's really hard to measure intensity. Well, you measure it, but then you really don't know. But sure enough, what we found out there on Tuesday night is that as Scott said, Democrats are excited. They are motivated. They are going to be there. And that's combined with the problem Republicans have had in the past, only now it's exacerbated when Donald Trump himself is not on the ballot. So they don't get that additional boost of whoever it is that only shows up when Donald Trump is on the ballot. So I think this is a perfect storm for Democrats to win and for Republicans to be defeated badly. I have not seen something like this looking this way going into the midterm. And by the way, we kind of skipped over something else. The Supreme Court race in Wisconsin between Chris Taylor and Lazar, that's over. Count it. The question now is, in those races, can Chris Taylor move beyond the 10, 11% margins, which the other progressive Supreme Court candidates have gotten recently, and move that margin even farther? That's really going to be what people are going to be watching in the spring to see if there's a signal that, is there another dollop of 2 or 3% of the vote that Democrats are going to get in the fall? And what does that impact? Beyond governor, the Democrats have kind of known they're probably going to win for governor. They're probably going to take back the Senate. In fact, they're almost certainly going to take back the state Senate. The big question is, with Robin Vos leaving, and he is, can Democrats win the assembly? And I think more and more people after Tuesday night will be saying, not just yeah, but heck yeah.
Let's go back to something you said earlier about the governor's race. So you don't think that Mandela Barnes, when he enters this race, is going to be the front runner? You don't think he's going to be able to sustain that? Tens of millions of dollars were spent to promote him in a U.S. Senate race recently, a race he narrowly lost. Why would none of that carry over when all the other candidates are scrapping out there at 4%, 5%? They got $1.50 in their account. Why would that, in most cases, a candidate like Mandela Barnes, that would transfer over and automatically make him the front runner in the race?
Well, very good question, Scott. I think there are two answers to that. Number one, there are at least a couple of people in that race who are in there already who are going to be very well funded. And that name recognition thing can be made up in a hurry. Secondly, remember, there are articles being written now. Mandela Barnes did not win. And Democrats are focused on winning. They know they can't afford to leave Ron Johnson in the Senate and not have an extra person, not have a majority there. So, and we may be the race that makes the difference on whether there is a majority or not. Although, by the way, what happened on Tuesday puts Iowa maybe in play and definitely puts, Ohio in play. But the problem is that name recognition, as you know, TV name recognition, which is what a lot of what Mandela got, that can float away. Yes, I mean, if they just did a poll tomorrow, sure, his numbers would be higher. But these other people will be able to catch up on that. And I think Mandela has a problem. That New York Times article is indicative of other things that are there that happened in the last race that really did not help. And Democrats want to win. I think it's a very different dynamic than it was when he ran the last time.
Well, I think we can agree that the race is wide open on the Democratic side. And there's going to be a lot of scrapping, a lot of ups and downs, and we don't really know who the nominee is going to be on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, there's a clear front runner, and I don't think there'll be any other entrants into the race. So Josh Showman's got to up his game, increase his profile. Otherwise, Tom Tiffany's going to walk away with that.
It's going to be interesting to watch, but watch for a Democratic governor next year. We'll see you next time.
You've been listening to The Insider with Chuck Chvala and Scott Jensen, sponsored by the Wisconsin County